Good morning and welcome everyone to our session on data governance with a focus on privacy and risk. I'm Kelly Fitzsimmons. I'm the founder and CEO of Project Evident, and I'll be moderating this esteemed panel. We are so fortunate to be joined by Margaret Meagher, who is Chief Impact Officer at Crisis Text Line. She is a masterful practitioner, and just a small plug for a case study that Project Evident and Crisis Text Line were able to work on together. You can find that in our resources. But in her role, Margaret leads AI-driven research. She is responsible for the impact of over 17 million mental health conversations worldwide. She advances ethical AI, applied governance, evidence-based practice, and systems-level innovation for equitable outcomes. We're so pleased that you're here, Margaret. We are also joined by what I like to call the national treasure, that is Erin Mote, who is founder and chief executive of InnovateEDU. Erin leads the organization and its major projects, including its policy and strategy portfolio. She is known for creating uncommon alliances for systems change, making sure that all the swim lanes are clear, but we are working in a coordinated fashion for the type of ecosystem strengthening that we need. As part of that, she leads the EdSafe AI Alliance, of which Project Evident is a proud member. And she also leads National AI Literacy Day. We'll hear a little bit more about that shortly. And finally, last but not least at all, we are joined by the incredibly thoughtful Shankar, who is Executive Director of the Council on AI Governance. And in his role, and as a result of his efforts, practitioners from both the public and the private sectors are able to access open, current, and practical tools for AI governance. So we have a wonderful, wonderful panel here to get us into this discussion, which is so critical right now, given that we all care about safe, healthy, and equitable AI adoption. So together in this panel, we will explore why strong, formalized data governance is essential for safe, responsible, and equitable AI adoption. We'll learn how proactive organizations can establish clear oversight structures, decision rights, and accountability mechanisms to ensure safe data use. And we will explore strategies to identify and mitigate AI risks through data governance that is aligned with equity commitments, legal obligations, and organizational values. We will hear from our panel shortly, but we will open up for questions from the audience around 11:35. Those who want to continue the conversation will be invited into a lounge at 11:45 until noon, if you'd like to have a little bit more time with our wonderful speakers. And also, our speakers will be sharing resources in the chat that they reference throughout their comments here. Okay, so let's get started. But first, as I promised, Erin, let me turn over to you to share a little bit more about National AI Literacy Day, and then we'll get into our conversation.
Well, thanks, Kelly, for the invitation to share about National AI Literacy Day, which is happening this Friday. So you're not too late. You still can take part in National AI Literacy Day. You'll join 175 supporting organizations from around the US who are hosting over 100 events in local communities focused on building AI literacy, whether that's at senior centers, libraries, schools, or online. There's statewide events in Texas, Florida, Ohio, Colorado, California. I should stop listing states because I'm going to forget one and they will be mad at me. But go online to ailiteracyday.org. You can navigate to find a virtual event. You can find an event in your local community, but also you can access over 50 curriculum resources in up to 45 minutes or 15-minute bite-sized lesson plans if you're an educator. Access asynchronous professional development from some of the world's leaders in AI literacy, or join us live for 6 different sessions on National AI Literacy Day that allow you to get into conversation with students, parents, and leaders in this country who are really trying to ensure that AI literacy is a universal, fundamental, and foundational literacy for all Americans. Thanks, Kelly, for giving me the opportunity to share about National AI Literacy. And we hope so many of you will take advantage of this day, but also this movement around AI literacy.
Great, fantastic, Erin. And thank you for your leadership here. Stay with me here because I'm going to field the first question to you. In part because you've got some late breaking fantastic news to share, but I'd like you to be the first responder, and then Margaret and Barb, please join in. So our first question is really about exploring the fact that most nonprofit district practitioners do have data governance policies already in place, but they need to be amended for AI adoption. So what are the non-negotiables? What are we seeing?
Yeah, well, I always love to break news on a webinar. So if you didn't see it, yesterday, our very first policy lab with EdSafe AI, we run a network right now of 29 school districts and 10 states all working on AI policy. New York City Public Schools was our very first one 3 years ago, right after they banned ChatGPT district-wide. They raised their hand and they said, we know that's not sustainable over the long term. We need to get our act together and put structures and systems in place for data governance, for privacy, to ensure that we're meeting the AI moment, from academic integrity to how we talk to parents, students, and educators about this technology. So yesterday, a culmination of 3 years of work dropped, and that's the New York City Public Schools AI guidance. And one of the things you'll notice about that guidance is that they're really basing that work on the SAFE framework from EdSafe AI. So safety, accountability, fairness, transparency, and efficacy. So they're not just saying, here's a set of non-negotiables around privacy, cybersecurity, and interoperability that you need to have as a foundational data infrastructure, but also we want to make sure that we're testing and trialing those tools once these tools hit classrooms to know if that they are having a positive effect on student outcomes, that efficacy pillar. So I'm really excited about this work. They've done an incredible amount of work, like many districts in the country, to look at their existing policy infrastructure. So their acceptable use policy, their academic integrity policy, their code of conduct, and not sort of throw the baby out with the bathwater, but to say, what about this needs to change in the age of AI? And I think the other really smart thing that we're seeing from districts who are at the forefront of this work is this iterative policy process. So I want to call out folks like Santa Ana Public Schools out in California, who actually have written into their board policies that they will be looking at their AI and tech policies every 6 months to review, to update, to think about whether or not they need to make some sort of update or do some more communication to students, educators, parents, and families about how things are changing. I want to call out Winterset School District, who was really focused on the positive effects of purpose-built educational technology, but also managing the peril of companion AI tools. And so just this December, they rolled out a prohibition on companion tools in their district. They said these are too high risk. We don't have good data governance here. We don't have good privacy. We don't have good cybersecurity. We haven't thought about integrating those into our mandated reporter policies that already exist. And so right now we're going to say, please don't use those tools. We're not ready for you to use those tools, and we think they have foreseeable harms. So this agility is something that I'm seeing, I'm noticing, and that leaders are really embracing, that it isn't a one and done, that it's an ongoing dialogue in communities, and it's an ongoing process around data governance, around privacy, security, and interoperability as foundational layers, but also then continually interrogating the evidence base and the research about whether or not we should be using AI in this way.
Erin, thank you. A lot there, and I love the agility of leading around this right now. Margaret, could I invite you to build on this and from your seat at Crisis Text Line?
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you, Erin. That was a fantastic overview, I think, of what all organizations really need to be thinking about and operationalizing. And I think I'll just double down and say that we need policies and controls for safe and ethical decision making at every step on the journey, right? And so, and that is a revolving door because AI and technology is changing so fast. So we really need to develop the capabilities and institutionalize the processes to manage that revolving door with a human in the driver's seat. And so for us at Crisis Text Line, that means, all the things that you've described. And I would say we also have, for example, added ensuring that we have IRB in place, IRB determinations for any of our human subjects research, right? As well as considering all of the, like we've changed some of our staffing, right? We've taken some decisions to bring in roles that oversee AI safety and ethics from a safety officer as well as a VP for clinical and AI NLP research. And so those safety and ethics are now sort of built into the rhythms of everything that we do. I'd love to, share more, but I think I'll pass back and hear more from Var.
Thank you, Margaret. Var, what are you seeing on this from your perspective across multiple sectors?
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. So more traditional data governance has often emphasized correctly data inputs, right? Representative data sets, accurate and complete data sets, as well as solid business logic. I think what's changed with the pace of change that Margaret just mentioned is that you're introducing a lot more model risk and a lot more vendor risk. And so you're kind of layering on those additional risks, and your data governance needs to evolve to mitigate those. And so you asked about non-negotiables. I'd say, first is just to get a solid idea of where all of your data comes from, what it's consented for, and then mapping how it moves through these other tools. And then second, spending a lot more time on vendor AI due diligence. And this is not just about what organizations say they're doing. It's also about looking at their track record. What kinds of leaders do they have? What is their revenue model? So just getting a really good sense of who you're dealing with, in addition to just what's happening with the data, and that'll give you a really good idea of, okay, when I ask questions like, what happens to my data when it goes through your system? Who trains on it? What rights do I have? That you'll get quick responses and that you'll get transparent responses. So I'll pause there, but that's how organizations can get started with strengthening their AI governance.
Thank you, Var. And Margaret, if I might come back to you and just pull on the thread, you talked about some of the new roles that you have put in place as part of how you're formalizing, but bring us down a click further. How is it that organizations can really ensure that data governance is followed? So we have the policies, we have the people in place, but what really works or maybe doesn't work so well to make sure that accountability is actually followed in the day-to-day?
Right. For us at Crisis Text Line, I think what has worked well is that we've basically taken some of these requirements and embedded them into specific roles and responsibilities. So institutionalizing into the sort of org chart. We have also refined and rearticulated the importance of governance of AI data safety at the level of the board. So we have a board data governance and security committee that also oversees everything that we do in this space. And then some of the things that I think they're just challenges. So I'll describe a little bit about Crisis Text Line as a nonprofit is in many ways like two different organizations moshed together. One is a classic nonprofit that has all the back office kind of business operations, so finance, fundraising, marketing, and communications, et cetera. And then we have a highly tech forward AI clinical org that's running a service that uses AI to really help us to support people in crisis faster and more efficiently and effectively. And so as we've embarked on this journey, I've noticed that it's taken a lens of and different approaches to bring both sides of the house to the same space of safety and ethics. And in fact, the tech side of the org was faster, and we that was part of our DNA, is how we were moving forward. But I think on the operations side of the organization, it really required us to canvas a list of all the tools that people were using that may, I think human behavior and AI adoption has moved so fast in the world that many people don't realize the risks they're bringing to an organization or mission if they're using a tool that they use in their everyday life that may have risks that they're not aware of. And so that has taken us a process to really, go through and manage and reduce the list of, for example, the vendors that we're specifically using, and have an authorized list.
Right. Margaret, thank you. Thank you for that. And Erin and Var, I might shift us into a little exploration about policy factors that need to be considered. And, Margaret, also feel free to jump in here. But, we have big P and small p policy. We have, regulatory conditions in some places and not so much in other places. When we've talked about the importance of really formalizing governance, how are organizations supposed to confront and factor in HIPAA, FERPA, GDPR, some of these other very important components to ensure not only legal compliance, but not stay at the floor, really try to rise to the ceiling? If you're serious about leading on governance, what's your advice here?
Well, I'll take like sort of the kids' privacy, safety, data, and education, and you can take some of the HIPAA and other sort of pieces there. I'm going to talk about two things. I'm going to talk about my favorite thing to talk about, which is existing regulatory undergirding. I know you guys are so excited to talk about regulatory undergirding. Who doesn't love it? It's almost as sexy as procurement. And so it's really important to say that there is existing regulatory undergirding that exists throughout federal and state laws. There's lots of opinions about whether it's sufficient or not. I'm going to say it's not sufficient. That's my opinion, that we have some more work to do, particularly where there are foreseeable harms in areas like chatbots and companions, in areas like consequential decision making, where Margaret so aptly points out a human needs to always be in the loop on decisions that might affect your life trajectory, whether you get a loan for a house, whether you get admissions to a selective university, so on and so forth. But I want to touch a little bit on the existing regulatory undergirding. So FERPA and COPPA exist within the federal space, and all school districts and organizations that are working with kids under the age of 18 or 13 need to pay special attention to this, as do vendors. So FERPA is about schools and school sort of roles and responsibilities around data in the educational record. And then we have COPPA, which is really the incumbent responsibility on vendors and consumer technologies who serve children. The rules are changing for COPPA, so something to be really attentive to is on April 22nd, there are new AI rules that will be enforceable from the FTC related to COPPA. And those have a lot to do with the intersection of this new technology and how we're protecting kids' data. And so pay attention. We don't have a whole webinar to go over what those updates are, but that's a really important thing to be paying attention to, particularly for young people who are under the age of 13. FERPA, has not had a significant update in quite a long time, and so is probably due for a little look-see there, whether or not we, in the direct control provision, which means you have to maintain direct control of your data, or in the school official provision, if if these new types of tools might touch those provisions in new and different ways, particularly if AI tools are using data that they have gained in the school official exemption to train their tools or to provide developmental inputs into their tools. So those are things that I would pay attention to in the existing regulatory undergirding. And while I have a crystal ball on my desk, I can't see the future, but I will say there is pretty substantial movement in state legislatures around AI and AI policy. There's some big bills coming forward, particularly in California and New York and a couple other places that are really going to change the game, potentially when it comes to kids' data, privacy, and AI. But also at the federal level, we're seeing the most acceleration of movement around AI technology, kids and data privacy, and AI regulation that I have seen in my 20 years in tech policy. So buckle up, stay tuned. This is going to be a hot topic at the federal level, and I would expect we'll have some resolution on where things are going when Ted Cruz rolls some new framework and bills responding to the White House in late April.
Thank you, Erin. Var, over to you.
Yeah, so firstly, I'm just excited to know that I'm not the only one who likes talking about regulatory undergirding and also procurement. So I think on your point, Kelly, ensuring that your data governance policies are updated to include which data can be used for model inputs, which data can be used for model training, and if in doubt, say no, and kind of that's the safest view from a compliance perspective. And I'll also say, to Erin's point about state laws, it's not just FERPA and HIPAA that we need to be concerned about and kind of federal guidance. It's also state laws like the Colorado AI Act, which comes into effect in June. One concern that we have is that a lot of smaller organizations and nonprofits in particular touch some of these areas that are considered high risk under these laws, but they don't necessarily know that the deadlines are coming up so soon. So the key concept in that law is consequential decision making. If your AI system touches anything like benefits eligibility, educational placement in areas like education or housing or employment, your AI use could very easily be considered high risk under the Colorado AI Act and other state AI laws. So it's something to watch for nonprofits in particular.
Thank you, Var. I'm hearing a theme here throughout about the strength in owning the space of saying no and when to prohibit, and the co-equal nature of that as much as I think it's a countervailing pressure to the go, hurry up and adopt now that we're sort of all experiencing. And Margaret, I'd like to invite you to share comments, but also move us into a little bit more of a conversation around trust. And I think one of the themes that clearly surfaced largely in the field, but in the work with the framework, is that AI adoption in particular goes at the speed of trust. And we do want to explore here the regulatory context, the policy context that we have to operate in and we should be operating in, along with the exploration of really, no kidding, what are the equity commitments that are shaping and should shape data governance decisions? How does trust play a role given the polarity of the space that we're in around AI adoption?
Yeah, thank you. I love that question. And just plus one, Erin and Var, I couldn't agree more about how you've responded to and described the regulatory and compliance environment and how important it is to become proficient in and understand where your organization sits in that. And I think what I would say is that's following the rules and meeting minimum compliance requirements is one thing, but trust and adoption go hand in hand. And so for us at Crisis Text Line, an example of that is we're pursuing ISO 42001 certification as the highest bar that we can identify worldwide to demonstrate our commitment to safety, ethics, and trust in this space in terms of how we work with data, what we do with it, and how we support people. And really that means human behavior and AI going hand in hand, right? So trust and adoption, human behavior together. I'll say organizational change is generally slow. And so we have to figure out how we can speed up the proficiency and literacy. Thank you, Erin, for the plug on AI literacy, because we really need to be able to help people catch up with that. Putting the right policies in place. So with respect to trust, it's just, we have to continuously be transparent and reach for the highest bar in terms of certification and standards that go beyond minimum regulatory compliance requirements.
Thank you, Margaret. Erin, would you like to build on this role of trust and the polarity around it?
Sure. So I think that what's interesting about how nonprofits often use AI systems is that for many nonprofits, the communities that they serve have a limited ability to push back on how their data is used. And so first, good data governance itself is a really important kind of equity commitment because it helps determine who's bearing the risk of getting it wrong. And then
Right.
second is it's making an imperfect start with explainability and notification. So it's kind of difficult to do, but ironically, the best place to start is to try. People need to understand how AI is acting, even if it's not a regulatory requirement in a given use case. You should try to build in a right to explanation for any AI influenced kind of analysis. That's what it looks like to operationalize trust.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I just dropped two resources in the chat. One is a checklist that we've developed for K-12 superintendents, but also K-12 CIOs and CTOs. Two different questions, one more technical, the other sort of more vision and governance related, and some of the transparency pieces that Var just talked about. I'll just tell you the single piece of advice I give to districts who are using technology tools, whether they're AI or not, is make sure that on your webpage and in a public forum, you have a place where you are posting what technology you're using and what for. That really creates the opportunity to be in dialogue about why we're choosing to use ed tech and why we are choosing to use these purpose-built technologies to aid learning. And I will tell you, just that simple act of transparency just builds trust in a means and a methods, both about educator judgment, but also opens the conversation with parents, communities, and others in a way that does not feel adversarial. And I think the thing we also have to recognize in this trust movement is that the part of our brain that is able to see the future of this technology is also the part of our brain that holds memories of the past. And I would be remiss if we didn't acknowledge that we've broken trust around literacy, digital literacy, media literacy, around social media. That did not turn out well for us. That's why I and so many others on this call, I think, are committed to learning our lessons from that technology getting out there and making sure that we're addressing things like AI literacy. How do we help and create critical consumers of this technology? How do we think about privacy, security, interoperability, and governance from the beginning? And how do we think about building that trust and transparency so that we can be engaged in active, agile policy making to meet this moment, so that we're not in 5, 10, 15 years looking back on this moment and saying, wow, we missed the opportunity to really equip all Americans with the ability to be critical consumers of this technology, to not just demonstrate what they know, but what they can create with what they know. I do believe that we can sort of bend the arc here. I wouldn't wake up every day and do this work without that belief. And so we just have to do something.
Erin, oh, appreciate that. And I think building that and heeding that call to action, Var, I'm going to start with you on this next question. What we'd like to explore and probe then is, what is the highest possible bar we could possibly achieve in terms of AI ethics, safety, and governance, particularly with regard to risk management? So are models in other countries, models in other places, where are we really seeing those high level standards or the highest possible level standards being set?
Yeah. So I think that ISO 42001 that Margaret mentioned is definitely, from an international assurance perspective, kind of well recognized and one that is well regarded. I think the highest bar for any given organization is probably going to be a culture of good AI governance. And so it's building out AI assurance as an ongoing kind of organizational capability, not a one-time exercise. And this is why I really like the Equitable AI adoption framework. I think that it recognizes that different organizations are at different places, have different resources, and need to deploy them in different use cases. So having a culture of curiosity where people kind of themselves ask questions about where the data goes, how it's being used, what the kind of vendor policies are, would be the highest bar for me.
Thank you, Var. And Margaret, if I could turn to you, and we've had some conversation about, is it human in the loop, or really is it technology in the loop, and are we ceding our human agency? But you've been incredibly thoughtful on where the handoff should be between humans and technologies. Can you share a little bit more about that from your experience at Crisis Text Line as it relates to risk mitigation and setting high standards?
Yes, absolutely. And first, I'll loop back, Var. I really loved your response just now, and I would say +1 to this isn't just about using a new technology. It really requires organizational change and human behavior coming together in new ways, right? And that means embedding AI into how decisions are made, how work gets done, how value is created, but keeping humans in the driver's seat of that. So what that looks like and what it means at Crisis Text Line is AI is getting better and better at risk detection. But in a moment of crisis, the number one question we get from millions of people who reach out to us every year, thousands every day, is, are you a human or are you a bot? They need a human, want a human, and we essentially our baseline focus is to make sure that handoff to human happens when we use technology to help humans connect to humans and support humans faster, more effectively, more efficiently. But the handoff is always focusing on human to human. And there are their most acute moments. So we're using AI to help us understand what those moments are and make sure that the handoff happens at any critical clinical decision-making point.
Thank you, Margaret. And we have 1 minute left before we're going to Q&A. So I'm going to invite the panelists for the fastest one sentence you can share. What is your advice to any organization starting their AI journey? What's the first thing they should do to strengthen their data governance? Erin, I'm going to put you on the hot spot to go first.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll just fall back on our policy stack and say the number one thing we've learned is if when an organization, school district, or entity doesn't have a clear vision of what they want to do with AI, they stumble. And so this is not about like auditing your tech tools or anything like that. The first step is to have a clear vision around how you will use AI or not use AI in your organization, because when you do that, it's a waterfall effect in that culture and change management that both Var and Margaret have highlighted, which is so important to this work.
Margaret, and then Var.
A plus one, and I would say that approach this from examine what you're doing and think about how you can do it better without removing humans. So how can you get this technology to help you achieve the mission that you're after more effectively without replacing humans in that loop?
Thank you. Var, want to bring us home?
For sure. I'll just say totally agree with both of those. I'll just say make data governance not a one-time exercise, but an ongoing exercise, something you revisit frequently, because just given the pace of change in AI and organizational change, you're going to need to keep updating your AI, data governance.
Thank you. Okay, that was brilliant. So appreciate you all. And you just bring these topics that, Erin, I do think procurement's sexy and I do think data governance is sexy, but you've all brought this to life. So thank you so much. We have a number of questions from the audience. So I'm going to pull out a few here so that we can help get answers to inquiring minds. We have a question here from Michelle Gilliard. Michelle, apologies if I mispronounced your last name. And the question is, what guidance and frameworks exist for boards of directors of nonprofit orgs that partner with school and school districts? What new kinds of board level risk management needs to be put in place to support mission and ensure compliance? Who would like to take that one?
I'm happy to grab that. I dropped the policy stack in place. There are tons of activities on aipolicylab.org, including exercises you can do with your board. Again, the board is part of the change management process. So getting clear about that vision, but also this centrality of human in the loop. And if there's one thing I think you need to pay attention to in terms of the regulatory outlook, Var hit it, which is sort of risk-based use cases and risk-based frameworks, whether you're operating in Asia, the Middle East, the US, Sub-Saharan Africa, or Europe. Risk-based frameworks are one really important way that the regulatory landscape is evolving. And even in that New York City guidance that I named, they translated that into something that's really easy: red, yellow, green. Risk-based framework. Green, use AI for these use cases. Yellow, have caution. Red, absolutely not. And so that kind of orientation can be really, really powerful. And the other thing you really need to pay attention to is consequential decision making. There are federal laws and there are state laws that are emerging around consequential decision making that will absolutely mandate that you do what Margaret's done, which is have a human in the loop on consequential decisions and have a plan to offboard when people kind of encounter either crisis or encounter some of these consequential decisions, that you can offboard them to a human. So you need to think about that risk and regulatory framework, and then what's your response protocol. That's where I would start.
Thank you, Erin. We have a question from Sarah Olson, which is, how enforceable are governance? This is an excellent question. How enforceable are governance commitments related to AI? We've seen changes to the terms of use of AI platforms like OpenAI, and it feels a bit like we are just at the mercy of the big platforms. Is there any defense for this? So this is about the enforceability of governance commitments related to AI. This is a big question.
Yeah, happy to take a crack at it. So I think it really depends on your relationship with the organization and how that commitment is made. So if it's just kind of a principle at an organization, it might be less enforceable or more enforceable if it is made in a contract or made in a public filing. And you see a lot of action against companies now that make statements related to AI in their public filings that are then later found not to be true. So it really depends on kind of the nature of that statement, whether it's made to you in a contract, whether it's made in a public filing. And then you also have as recourse, the court of public opinion. If somebody, has a principle that they say they'll do something, and then they explicitly don't do it, that's a kind of recourse as well. And I know all three of those are kind of limited in the different ways they can be used, but those are some ways in which you can have recourse.
Thank you, Var. Margaret, would you like to build on that, or?
Yeah, I think that was a fantastic summary, and the challenge is that there's not one easy fit for all response to that. It really is multiple domains, and it has to do with your organizational culture. It has to do with your organizational legal and contractual agreements made in the terms that are agreed to by the decision makers of that, as well as the perception of the world about your organization and about others. And so it's all of those domains, and we just have to keep moving through them as best we can. It's messy space, but I think that, I'm optimistic, because I think that we can, as we have better governance in this space within our organizations, all of those flow more easily.
Thank you.
I'll also say one quick thing here, that the meta decision yesterday in New Mexico is going to have a knock-on effect here. And so
Yes.
I think we're going to see, coming out of that level of fine, it's going to be appealed 100% by Meta, but that level of fine and the point Bar made around public statements and enforceability and the use of the courts, I think you're going to see that emerge. And I think you also see some states moving forward, California and a couple others, in thinking through what is the private right of action or the recourse that consumers have, that allows them to bring suit in a court and not be at the mercy of arbitration. So definitely on chatbots and companions, that is moving, but also in other areas. So this is a fast moving intersectionality around the court of public opinion, the actual courts, and the policy and regulatory landscape. So buckle up, folks.
Thank you, Erin. Sage advice as always. Again, with my eye on the time, I'm going to attempt to blend two questions that are in chat that are kind of ground level but practical asks. One relates to the fact that we opened with the comment that most organizations have data governance policies in place. They need to be amended for AI. There's a question around, what does that actually look like in practice? How would we know that we should amend rather than wholesale replace? There is a related question also about what are boards' accountabilities in this and in data governance practice. So I'm wondering if we can dig into practically, what does it look like in practice to either amend or change your data governance policy for AI? And then part B, what is boards' responsibility, accountabilities in this larger and related data governance practice?
I'm holding back. I was wondering, Bar, if you wanted to start with anything with respect to the policy. I'm happy to jump in.
Sure. Yeah. So just on the very quickly, just I'll address the when to amend and when to replace. I think using that risk-based framework gives you a good sense of when something can be kind of tweaked and when something needs to be wholesale amended, because if it's just an administrative task or something, a low risk type of data, then it doesn't make sense to get too deeply into it. But if it's a high risk use case or uses a type of data that's private, or that I also think the definition of privacy is kind of imperfect. It's not just data that's private, but also data that is kind of related to a person and valuable. Then that could be a higher risk use case where you need to kind of have a net new posture on data governance. And I'll pass back to you, Margaret, for the rest of that.
Great, thank you. And so building on that, I think that the it comes back to consequential decision making, and then how that's wired into the sort of terms of reference and even the charters for roles, and that includes the board. So boards of governance have terms of reference and charters, and how frequently are they updated? How frequently are they amended to encompass these risks and responsibilities? And so I can say at Crisis Text Line, we have our board meets regularly, and we update our charters regularly, and for not just the board, but even for the committees of the board, which include data governance and security. So I can speak to that in practice. I think part of the question was how much of that is publicly visible. And to that, I'm not exactly in a position to be able to speak to, but we're all in spaces where norms and practices between private organizations and public organizations have different expectations and minimum expectations about transparency as well.
Great. Margaret, thank you. To the audience, thank you for joining us so far. We are at the end of our time. Var, Erin, Margaret, you are just extraordinary leaders, and I could panel with you till kingdom comes. Just so appreciate you all and your rigorous thinking and generous sharing on this topic. I would like to invite folks into the lounge. If you would like to continue, folks in the audience, if you'd like to continue conversation with Margaret, Erin, or Var, by clicking the back arrow that's at the top left of your screen, then find a table. This is kind of like if we were in person and you were coming up to the panel at the front of the room because you really want to follow up and have a bit of a chat. Please take advantage of that left arrow and just join me in congratulating and thanking our panelists. Thank you all for making this topic come to life. I appreciate you.